If you're an American thinking about buying property in Mexico, you may think the biggest question is the price. But for many buyers, the real question is much bigger. Can you actually own it? Or are you buying something that works very differently than what you expected? Because this is where a lot of Americans get nervous. They hear, foreigners can't own land in Mexico. Then they hear, you need a bank trust. Then they hear, beach property is different. And suddenly, a beautiful condo near the ocean starts to feel legally confusing. So in this video, I'm going to make this simple. I'll explain what Americans can own directly, when a trust may be required, and the one mistake you do not want to make before you fall in love with a property. Because the answer is not simply yes or no. The real answer is, yes, but the structure matters. So let's start with the simple answer. Yes, Americans can buy property in Mexico. And yes, Americans can legally own property in Mexico. But how that ownership is structured depends on where the property is located. That last part is what many buyers miss. Location does not just affect the view. It can affect the ownership structure. In Mexico, this generally means property within about 100 kilometers of an international border, or within about 50 kilometers of the coastline. And that matters because many of the places Americans are most interested in, beach towns, coastal condos, resort areas, and retirement destinations, are inside that zone. But here's the part most buyers misunderstand. Restricted zone does not mean Americans cannot buy there. It does not mean you are automatically blocked from owning a condo near the beach. And it does not mean the property is fake, unsafe, or impossible to control. It means the structure is different. And if you understand that structure before you buy, the whole thing becomes much less confusing. In many coastal and border areas, foreign buyers commonly use something called a fideicomiso. That simply means a Mexican bank trust. And this is where many Americans get nervous. They hear the word trust and think, wait, does the bank own my property? But here's the simple way to understand it. The bank holds title through the trust, while you are the beneficiary. And as the beneficiary, you can generally use the property, sell it, rent it, improve it, and pass your rights on to heirs. So for many buyers, the trust is not the scary part. The scary part is buying without understanding how it works. And this is why the buying process matters so much. Because ownership is not just about finding a beautiful condo. It is about making sure the structure, the documents, the notary process, and the closing steps are done correctly. I have another video where I walk through how Americans buy property in Mexico step by step. I'll link it here. Because once you understand the full buying process, this ownership question becomes much easier to understand. Now, outside the restricted zone, the ownership structure can be more straightforward. In many inland areas, a foreign buyer may be able to hold direct title. So buying in an inland city is not always the same as buying near the coast. A property in Mexico City is not the same ownership conversation as a beachfront condo in Puerto Vallarta, or a home near the border, or a resort property near the ocean. Here's the mistake I would not want you to make. Do not assume every property in Mexico works the same way. Some buyers see a beautiful listing, fall in love with the ocean view, and immediately start thinking about retirement, rental income, or furniture. But before you get emotionally attached, you need to know what ownership structure applies. Is the title clean? Who is verifying the documents? And what exactly happens before money moves too far? This is why the professional team matters. In Mexico, the closing process is different from what many Americans are used to in the United States. You do not want to rely only on what the seller says, or only on what the listing says, or only on what someone online says. You want the documents reviewed properly before you are too deep into the transaction. Because the goal is not just to buy the property. The goal is to understand what you are buying. So can Americans really own property in Mexico? Yes. But the key is understanding the structure. Outside the restricted zone, direct ownership may be possible. Inside the restricted zone, especially near the coast or border, a fideicomiso is commonly used. For many buyers, that structure is normal. The risk is not simply the trust. The risk is not understanding the trust before you buy. So before you buy, ask 3 simple questions. Number 1, where is the property located? Number 2, what ownership structure applies? And number 3, who is verifying the documents before closing? Those 3 questions can save you a lot of confusion before you get too far into the process. And of course, this video is for general education. Before buying any property, you should work with qualified local professionals who can review your specific property, location, title, and documents. Because in Mexico real estate, the details matter. Now, ownership is only one piece of the buying process. The bigger question is, what actually happens step by step before you become the owner? So watch this video next. I walk through how Americans buy property in Mexico from start to finish, so you can understand the process before money starts moving.